Hello, I'm Janet Harris, President of the Indiana Council on World Affairs. It's my pleasure to introduce a program that has been developed in response to what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, narrow passage, global impact. And to introduce the program tonight is VP of Programs for the Indiana Council of World Affairs, Dr. Betty Thompson.
Hit my OK record button. Thank you, Janet. This is a special program tonight. This is really in alignment with our mission. Our mission at the Indiana Council of World Affairs is consistent with the World Affairs Councils of America to bring you credible and informative programs about important global matters and how they intersect with the United States. And we've often talked about here at ICWA about looking at programs that are timely and urgent. And this part, the war in Iran right now is timely and is urgent. It is deeply impacting the United States. We don't know yet to what extent. There's so much going on that's exacerbating the issue. With Iran's threats of retaliation against the United States, we have memories of 9/11 behind us. We have TSA workers who are not being paid. We have a very high percentage of them quitting. And a sense of real vulnerability around the United States, as well as the serious increase of gas prices, and certainly at least a correction, if not a plunge, of the stock market. And I'm now hearing at my home the tornado signal. So let's bring on the tornado signals. We may have a tornado in the middle of this program. I don't know where you are, but we're having very serious high winds and storms right now. So we thought it was really critical. We have a packed program year, and we're going to be going through our programs run us right into May, but we thought we really cannot wait until the end of May to bring you this program. We had a free week this week, and we thought, let's just take this program right now and bring this to you. And we have a great speaker, Ken Holland. Dr. Ken Holland is on our board. And you might remember that Ken had his conversation with General Petraeus in January, because Ken served as a special advisor for General Petraeus when he was in Afghanistan, serving as the president of the American University of Afghanistan. And Ken has a tremendous expertise he's bringing to this topic this evening. So it was an absolute natural that he would be really the appropriate person to share this with you. He's a special consultant and advisor to NATO, the Department of Defense, and the State Department on rule of law and matters just as what we're experiencing right now. And so this is meant to be, there'll be a moderated discussion. Q&A that Ray Montano, who's also our board member, Dr. Montano, and between Ken and Ray have select questions, and then we will be opening it up to you as we always do, and it will be for your questions, and also if you have any comments. We sense that there's a tremendous anxiety associated with this, as there, of course, there would be with any war. We have to call it that. We can't call it an excursion. We have 13 people who have come home dead. And how many more, it's unknown. And we want to give you an opportunity to ask questions and comment. So Ray, would you like to begin your conversation and discussion with Ken?
Thank you, Betty. So Ken, maybe we could start a little bit by giving us a little background on how you got involved with issues in the Middle East, and then you can kind of take us through your comments tonight.
Sure, Dre. Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you and to share some conversation about foreign affairs and what's going on in the Middle East right now. Myself, I first became involved in that region of the world in 2006 when the World Bank asked me to rebuild the system of higher education in Afghanistan. And I was working for the World Bank and then for the State Department and for NATO for 13 years, from 2006 to 2019 in Afghanistan. And the way I became involved with General Petraeus was I wrote a book called Comparative Judicial Systems, and the NATO decided to rebuild the rule of law in Afghanistan. And so they said, you've written a book about it, so now you have a chance to implement your ideas. So I was the subject matter expert on rule of law in Afghanistan for NATO. So I reported to General Petraeus in Kabul. So I had an office there in Kabul. And then I also reported to the commander of NATO in Mons, Belgium. And that was Admiral Stavridis, who you probably have seen on talk shows like CNN, MS Now. Um, and and then I also was asked by the State Department to rebuild higher education in Iraq. So I spent quite a bit of time in Iraq, Tajikistan, Pakistan. In 2015, the government of Iran invited me to be their guest. So I went to Iran for 1 week, visited Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, went to Persepolis, the ancient capital of Persia. So I spent a very enjoyable week touring Iran as a guest of the government. I met quite a few nuclear scientists during that trip. So it gave me a lot of insight into Iran's nuclear ambitions as well. So I had quite a bit of experience in that part of the world, Ray.
And thank you. And so in terms of the kind of how we approach this whole problem, it's so complicated for most of us to kind of understand, what who are the players that are involved here. And, we look at the uh, Gulf Coast, the Gulf countries. Some of them seem to be in favor of this, and some of them are opposed to it. What are some of the kind of relationships that exist already between Iran and some of these other Gulf countries, and why do some support the bombing and others are opposed to it?
Yeah, one good way to begin is to understand that Iran is ancient Persia. And so the people who live there, most of them are ethnically Persian, and they're also Shia Muslims. When you cross the Persian Gulf, you encounter Arab countries, and they are primarily Sunni Muslim. So there's always been conflict, between the Shia Persians and the Sunni Arabs. And in the 1980s, there was a war between Iraq and Iran. Uh, and it was a terrible, terrible war. It lasted for 10 years. 500,000 people were killed during that war. It's an area where there's been historic conflict. So the Arab countries would really love to neutralize Iran as a threat to their interest in the Middle East.
So in terms of, I know you brought some materials you'd like to share with us. Maybe you could kind of walk us through some of the comments, and after that, we can get to some more questions and hopefully some comments from our participants.
Sure. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep, we're in good shape. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, as you can see here, we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. It's only 21 miles wide. And what's interesting is that it actually falls within the territory of Oman and Iran. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, each country that borders an ocean has a 12-mile territorial limit, 12 nautical miles. And so actually the territory of Iran and the territory of Oman overlap. So as we'll see, this causes conflict currently. But you can see here how you see that when ships enter the Persian Gulf, they travel through a 2 mile wide sea lane entering the Persian Gulf. And when they're leaving the Gulf, they um, travel through a 2 mile wide sea lane exiting. So the ships themselves are only covering with 4 miles. So you can see how narrow the strait is for the tankers and merchant ships. Now, you'll also notice in this slide that there's an island called Larak Island, which is part of Iran. You see the line between Iran and Oman, the border here between the two countries. And Larak Island will be very important later on in my presentation. It's one of the islands that the U.S. is considering invading and occupying. You also notice that the United Arab Emirates has a port called Fujairah, which empties into the Gulf of Oman. So a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz does not affect the port of Fujairah, which is important. Also, Oman borders on the Arabian Sea, so it's not affected by the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the reason that ships from all over the world have access to the strait, even though it falls within the territory of Oman and Iran, is because in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Strait of Hormuz is classified as an international strait. And under that classification, all commercial and military ships have unlimited transit passage, even in times of emergency or in times of war. Now, what's kind of interesting is that neither Iran nor the US is a signatory to UNCLOS, but the United States nevertheless treats transit passage through the strait as part of customary international law. Now, Iran, on the other hand, claims sovereignty over the entire strait. And so recently, when President Trump was negotiating with Iran over ending the war, apparently President Trump made a 15-point demand. And then Iran responded by saying, oh, well, you have your 15 points, but we have our points as well. And there are two things we're asking for. One is we want reparations for all the damage you've caused to our infrastructure through your bombing. And then secondly, we want you to recognize that we have sovereignty over the Hormuz Strait. So that's another point of States and Iran. You'll see here the entire Persian Gulf, and this map shows you the major oil fields in that part of the world, the location of oil refineries, and also tankers. And you'll notice Kark Island up here at the very northern end of the Persian Gulf. That is where Iran exports 90% of its oil. And you'll also notice that Bahrain has actually, its main function is to refine oil and to receive imports of needed in the region. So Bahrain is not an oil exporting country, but it still has an important commercial function to play in the Gulf. So how important is the Strait of Hormuz? I think we all know that for just by reading the news that it's extremely important. 20 to 25% of all the oil exported in the world passes through the strait. 20% of all liquefied natural gas passes through the strait. Qatar is the largest, produces 1/3 of all the liquefied natural gas in the world. So it's a very important source of LNG. And then also fertilizer. The key inputs into fertilizer are urea and sulfur. They're both produced in very large quantities in the Persian Gulf. And actually 30 to 35% of all the world's trade in fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Gulf countries have different reserves of petroleum, and you can see a ranking here on the left-hand side. The largest producer of oil by far is Saudi Arabia. So they have a great deal at stake in the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. They do have a pipeline that they have built connecting their oil fields to the Red Sea, but the pipeline cannot carry nearly as much oil as ships that would pass through the strait. Iraq is the second largest producer of oil. It's totally dependent on the strait. It has no other way to export its oil. The United Arab Emirates, as we saw on the map, they do have a port that is directly onto the Red Sea. But again, most of their exports also goes through the straits. Kuwait is, again, very dependent on Hormuz. It can't get its oil out any other way. Iran, it's also dependent on the Persian Gulf, and it's dependent on the Hormuz Strait. Qatar, fully dependent on Hormuz. Qatar is more important, is an LNG exporter than an oil exporter. Oman, we saw, is much less dependent on the Hormuz Strait since it can export directly to the Arabian Sea. And then Bahrain is primarily a refining hub. It doesn't have much oil. But Saudi Arabia, Iraq, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, they have a huge stake in the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. And you can see here the number of tankers. Again, Saudi Arabia generates the largest number of tankers that pass through the strait, 28% of them. Iraq's the second largest number, then Qatar, UAE, and Kuwait. Iran accounts for 11% of the tankers. Now, where does all this oil and gas go? Well, it goes mostly to Asia. You can see the largest single destination for oil from the Persian Gulf is China. The second largest receiver is India, and then South Korea, Japan are also huge consumers. So China has, in some ways, the most at stake because they are the most dependent on the free flow of petroleum products through the strait. You can see that relatively little of this Persian Gulf oil goes to Europe and even less to the US because of the fracking development in the United States. The United States is now a net producer of oil. So it's really self-sufficient in oil. It's not, and this is very important, the US is not dependent on oil from the Persian Gulf. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is what's called a maritime shipping lane choke point. That means that a hostile government or even a hostile non-state actor could close any of these choke points. So the free flow of goods around the world really depends on these choke points being kept open. And you can see they're identified here on this map of the strait. And look at one way to look at these choke points is from the point of view of China. China, the great manufacturing power in the world. If you look at China's dependence on exporting its goods by ship. 75% of all Chinese goods are exported by ship. Almost all of their oil, comes by ship to China. If you look, you saw China is vulnerable to the closing of the Strait of Malacca, south of Malaysia. They're vulnerable to the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. They're vulnerable to the closing of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the mouth of the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. In previous wars, the access to the Black Sea through the Turkish Straits, the Dardanelles, has been very important. For example, World War I. The Strait of Gibraltar, World War II, Germany tried to prevent Allied shipping from entering the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar. Of course, the English Channel is quite narrow between England and France. The Danish Straits, again, wars have been fought over the centuries, for example, during the Napoleonic period, trying to close access in through the Danish Straits. And of course, the Panama Canal is also a potential choke point as well. So these are areas where any country that depends on international trade is very vulnerable. So some of you are probably asking, well, if Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, why haven't their proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, also closed the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, and thus closing the Red Sea? And it's kind of interesting because the Houthis apparently made a cost-benefit analysis and decided that if they do close the strait, that they will suffer, tremendous retaliation, and they're not willing to pay that price at the current time. As you know, the Houthis are involved in a civil war in Yemen, and in the past, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been involved in that civil war. And so the Houthis do not want to provoke the Arab countries in returning and becoming belligerents against them in Yemen. However, the Houthis are dependent on Iran for their financial support, and so the longer the war continues, it actually is more likely that the Houthis will intervene and will attempt to close the Red Sea. So it could be a situation where both the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf are closed. That would be more than 50% of the oil that travels through the Red Sea, and so they're going to be with the price of gas will increase even more if the Houthis try to close the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. Currently, there's also a multinational effort to keep the Red Sea open. This is in response to previous efforts by Somali pirates to attack merchant ships, and also by the Houthis to close the strait. And so there is this multinational effort to keep the strait open. It's called Operation Prosperity Guardian, and it's led by the United States. It includes Britain, France, Italy, and the Netherlands, as well as other countries. There's another group called the Combined Maritime Forces. That's also closely associated with the United States. It's a 34-nation naval coalition, and it's based in Bahrain. It's actually adjacent to the U.S. Fifth Fleet. So the United States Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. The European Union also has its own naval force to try to keep the Red Sea open. They call that Operation Atalanta. And then China is very concerned about piracy, and so they have a naval base in Djibouti. This is the only overseas naval base that China has. And look where it's located. So you can see here the Bab el Mandeb. Again, this strait is only about 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, the same width as the Strait of Hormuz, about 20 miles. And you see where Djibouti is located. And that's why the Chinese picked that country to put their naval base. So China obviously has a great deal at stake in keeping these waterways open. Now, for the last 300 years, until 1945, Britain took responsibility for keeping the sea lanes open. And they said they had to do it in order to support British commerce. And the British Navy was tasked with preventing any of their rivals, such as France or Spain, from controlling, or the Russians from controlling any of these choke points. So the British have been focused on the choke points that I identified in the sea lanes for hundreds of years. The Royal Navy existed to secure the sea lanes on which the British Empire depended. Now, in 1945, the British Empire started to collapse at the end of World War II. And so the Royal Navy lost its mission of being the principal enforcer of the idea of freedom of navigation. But the United States picked up the baton. So if you actually look at Title 10 of the United States Code, this is actually written into an act of Congress. It defines the mission of the United States Navy, and one of the missions of the U.S. Navy is maintain freedom of the seas. So Britain basically passed responsibility for maintaining freedom of navigation all around the world to the United States. So many U.S. presidents have emphasized this role of the United States Navy. President Woodrow Wilson, for example, said that the United States would combat Germany and would defeat the submarine warfare effort of the German Navy to sink merchant ships in the Atlantic. And in the 14 points, which he issued in 1918, he said that there will be absolute freedom of navigation upon the seas in peace and in war. And then in the 1980s, during that war between Iraq and Iran, President Ronald Reagan got involved because Iran was attacking U.S. ships and merchant ships and tankers in the Persian Gulf. And so he said that I will do whatever is necessary to maintain freedom of navigation in the Persian Gulf. And he named the U.S. military operation Operation Earnest Will. And the U.S. engaged in combat in the 1980s in the Persian Gulf to defend international shipping and freedom of navigation. Again, President George H.W. Bush, during the first Gulf War, said that the U.S. Navy would underwrite global commerce through secure sea lanes. Again, President Obama said the same thing during his administration. Now, the reality, of course, is that the strait is effectively closed. It has been closed since February 28th, when the United States and Israel began their bombing campaign against Iran. Under normal conditions, about 80 to 100 ships transit the strait each day. Now the number is between 5 to 15, and on some days it's near zero. So the strait is not physically closed, it's not blockaded, but it's operating at a very small fraction of its normal capacity. So the economic effect of the current situation is the same as if there were a physical barrier across the strait. Now, if we look at Admiral Brad Cooper's statements, it's quite interesting. He, as you know, is the head of the U.S. Central Command. I'm just quoting from him. He said, "The Strait of Hormuz is physically open to transit. The reason ships are not transiting right now is because Iran is shooting at them with drones and missiles." As we all know, because of the following the war in Ukraine, that drones now play a very important role in modern warfare. And we know that Iranians produce thousands of drones and supply them to Russia. Uh, Admiral Cooper has emphasized that U.S. operations are aimed at securing shipping lanes and degrading Iran's ability to threaten them. So you can see that Admiral Cooper uh, is really committed to the Navy's mission. The U.S. will continue to rapidly deplete Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation. Now, what's the problem? The problem is the U.S. Navy cannot open the Strait of Hormuz because it cannot force ships to use it. These are privately owned tankers and merchant ships, and the decision about whether they sail or not through the strait is made by the owners, and the owners have to consult their insurance carriers. So the actual functioning of the strait depends on markets as much as it does on military power. We've talked a little bit about the price shocks that have occurred since February 28th. So disruption in the Strait of Hormuz has triggered a global oil price surge. Oil prices are now over $100 a barrel. Gasoline has risen substantially. You can see that in Indiana, the average price of a gallon of gasoline was $3.33 on February 9th. It's now $4.08. The price of diesel fuel has surged nearly 90 cents a gallon, and diesel fuel affects the price of any good that is transported by truck. So all those 18-wheelers you see on I-70, they're now, those companies are paying a lot more for diesel fuel, and so the prices of the goods that they carry will also be rising, including food. One of the biggest jumps has been in jet fuel. Jet fuel has jumped from $93 per barrel to $200 per barrel, a huge increase, over 100% increase. So airlines are now canceling flights, and of course, airfare has been rising as well. Fertilizer. We saw that about a third of all fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz, and that as a result, fertilizer prices are now up more than 30% since early March. U.S. farmers report delayed deliveries of fertilizer, uncertainty about availability, and of course, this is the key moment. This is the time of the spring planting. So this fertilizer shortage and price increase couldn't have hit them at a less opportune time. So we're going to probably see lower yields per acre because of the lack of fertilizer and then higher food prices. Karg Island, that's been in the news quite a bit. So 80 to 90% of all Iran's oil exports pass through the island. There are very large storage tanks, loading terminals for super tankers, pipeline connections from the mainland of Iran. So it's really a critical infrastructure for Iran's oil industry. So Karg Island is the gateway between Iran's oil fields and the global market. Here's a aerial photograph of Karg Island. It's very small. It's only 7.7 miles square. So pretty small. But look at the loading. It has a loading capacity of approximately 7 million barrels per day. and Iran only produces around 3 million barrels per day. So it's a very huge oil facility. 90% of Iran's oil is exported through Karg Island. Now, what is Iran's oil strategy? Well, their total export of oil is down, but their export of oil to China is up. So Iranian tankers are transiting through the strait and primarily going to China. And even though the U.S. bombed Karg Island, it's still functioning. I saw today that many of the facilities are still operational, and the tankers are being filled from those surviving tanks. So it still is functioning. And Iran is receiving huge revenue from the sale of the oil that is loaded onto the tankers at Karg Island. So Iran allows tankers that it approves to still transit through the strait. Now, you may have heard that the Pentagon is developing options for what it calls a final blow in Iran, designed to force the Iranians to negotiate an end to the war. And if you notice, the options that the Pentagon has laid out involve, first of all, Karg Island. So the Pentagon plan involves either invading or blockading Karg Island. We looked at Larak, which is on the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz, and it's a very strategic location. So that island could also be invaded and occupied. There's another island called Abu Musa, which is controlled by Iran, but it's actually claimed by the United Arab Emirates. So there's a border dispute, territorial dispute, and this island is, as you'll see, is very strategically located in the strait as well. And also, the Pentagon plan calls for either blocking or seizing ships that are exporting Iranian oil on the eastern side of the Hormuz Strait. And I'll show you a map where those ports are located. So this is the Pentagon options for a final blow against Iran. So you can see here that Larak Island is right here, just south of Keshem, Keshem Island, Larak Island is there. Abu Musa is halfway between Iran and the UAE, controlled by Iran but claimed by the UAE. There are other islands, the Greater Tunbi Islands, that could also be invaded and controlled by the United States in a marine or airborne operation. So in conclusion, then, we can say that the Strait of Hormuz is not physically closed. There's no physical barrier, but it's functionally disrupted. The United States it can open the strait militarily, but it cannot force ships to use it. There are several hundred ships that are just anchored in the strait, and they're all unwilling to make that passage because of the risk of being attacked by Iran with a missile or a drone or a mine. What's interesting is that the insurance market is now determining whether the sea lanes function. Not the U.S. Navy, but the insurance industry. It's a global insurance industry. The hulls of the ships are insured. The content of the ships, the oil itself is insured. The seamen on the ship, they could sue if they were injured in it or killed in an attack. Their families could sue. So the owners of these ships have to have liability insurance. So the insurance burden is very, very heavy. So freedom of navigation still exists as a principle. It's still a mission of the U.S. Navy, but the U.S. Navy can no longer guarantee freedom of navigation by itself. So thank you very much for your attention and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, Ken, thank you very much. There we go. I have a few questions for you, and then we'll turn it over. Those of you who have questions, if you want to send your questions to the chat, we'll call on you in sort of the order. If you have a comment about the situation you'd like to kind of share with the group, we're open to that as well. So I guess the first question I have for you, Ken, is despite all the bombing, how does Iran still have all the capacity to interrupt shipping in the Strait?
Yeah, so this is something that Iran has figured out, that it's easy to close the strait simply by firing a few drones, a few missiles, and planting a few mines. That's all that's needed to deter the owners of the ships from using the strait. So Iran is using what we call asymmetric warfare. The United States, Israel are engaged in symmetric warfare, bombing from aircraft. And so, so Iran is basically fighting a very different kind of war from the one that the U.S. and Israel are fighting.
So is that area that borders the strait there? What is the terrain like? Is it plain, mountainous, or
No, it's mountainous. So it's very easy for the Iranians to conceal missiles and drones inside caves. They can dig out bunkers and put the missiles and the drones and the mines into those bunkers. So it's very difficult to get at them. And also they're mobile. So you have the mountains, and so it's fairly easy to conceal even mobile launchers in that kind of terrain.
So that makes it very difficult to kind of use air power to defeat that strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not an economist, I realize, but in terms of once this sort of ends and the strait reopens, how long do you think it would take for the global economy to recover from this disruption?
Yeah, it'll take several months, if not longer. For example, Qatar's liquefied natural gas facility has been heavily damaged by Iranian strikes. And so it'll take, I think they told me, I think I saw, they said it would take a year for them to rebuild that facility. So LNG will be in short supply for sure for an extended period of time. And then once the insurance companies decide that it's risk-free, then you'll start to see these tankers start to move out of the strait. But again, that'll take several months for that to be straightened out, because in fact there may be over 1,000 tankers right now just sitting in the Persian Gulf.
That's amazing. In terms of Trump's requests to European nations and other allies for support in this process, we get the impression they've said no. Maybe they are hedging their bets a little bit on what's going on there. What do you think the motivation is behind the reluctance of our allies to get involved in this turmoil?
Yeah, I think so the first thing to understand is there's no provision of the NATO treaty that is involved here. Iran did not attack the United States. The United States attacked Iran. So that did not trigger, Article 5, collective defense provision. And then secondly, the Europeans say they weren't consulted in advance. And so they don't think this is a war of their making. It's a war of, the U.S. making and Israel's making. And then they don't want to be involved in actual combat, in actual, armed conflict. That's not something they have a stomach for right now.
Okay. So do you think that is a definite forever no, or do you think there might be some uh, chances that they would change their minds at some point down the road?
Well, I think they're waiting for the United States and Iran to come to an agreement to end the war. And then after that agreement is in place and hostilities had ceased, then they may very well become willing to, help restore confidence in the, security of the strait. But I don't think they'll do anything prior to the cessation of hostilities.
Yeah. You mentioned you spent some time in Iraq. Um, in terms of like comparing Iran and Iraq, if there were to be ground forces introduced into this conflict, uh, we kind of got the impression with the Iraq War that it was relatively easy for American forces to be successful. Do you think that would be the same situation in Iran?
Well, Iran has a country of 90 million people. And so the United States would have to land, thousands of probably 100,000 troops, because think of how difficult it would be to occupy a country of the size of Iran is larger than Iraq. So to occupy a country that physically large and also that populous, and remember in Iraq the Sunni Arabs were in control under Saddam Hussein. Once we, deposed Saddam Hussein, the almost entire Iraqi army, which was made primarily of Sunni Arabs, they became insurgents, and so they started attacking, U.S. forces. So again, there would be an insurgency in Iran, because the size of the Iranian army, is quite large, and so many of those soldiers, even if the government in Tehran were toppled, they would take up arms against the United States. So you're looking at a very large number of U.S. troops needed to take control and maintain control, and then fight an insurgency.
So, do you think that our military leaders and advisors, intelligence folks underestimated Iran's ability to kind of absorb this war to this point?
Yeah, I think so. For example, I think one of the assumptions was if you decapitate the regime, then it will create the conditions for a popular uprising. And of course, that did not turn out to be the case. Secondly, there was, I guess, an underestimation of the capacity of Iran to engage in asymmetric warfare. And then remember, this is kind of interesting too, because since Iran depends on the strait for the export of its oil, and since its primary revenue for the government comes from the sale of oil, there was an assumption that Iran would not close the strait. And that turned out not to be the case. And Iran launched, as you know, extensive missile and drone strikes against the Arab countries on the Persian Gulf. And I think that also was not considered a high likelihood, by the U.S. planners. So the several things happened that were not anticipated.
In terms of the kind of expansion of this idea, we talked about all those other straits earlier on. Do you think the success Iran is having with this might encourage other groups to look at other straits and say, hey, we might be able to leverage this strategy to get to an end that we're interested in?
Yeah, in fact, you could almost say that Iran is writing the playbook. They're writing the manual on how you can close a maritime choke point. You just need a few missiles, some drones, maybe some mines, and you can kind of hide out, in the mountains or in the villages. So all maritime trade now is, I think, more vulnerable than it ever was before.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you. Like I said earlier, if you have a question or would like to make a comment, please let me know in the chat room. And we do have a comment from Dan. You out there, Dan?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Great job, Ken. Dan Miller here.
Hey, Dan.
Good to see you. Just wanted a quick question since Israel's such a key player in all of this. If you were to add a slide that pertained to Israel as part of this story, what would you put on the slide?
Oh, yeah. Okay. The first thing I would put on the slide is that Israel does not depend on the Strait of Hormuz. So its closing is not a loss to them. That's very important. The United States is much more affected by the closing of the strait than is Israel. So that would be the first point I'd make, Dan.
Thank you.
That's an interesting point there about Israel. We've heard varying stories about whether Israel kind of goaded us into this war. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I think what happened was that Israeli intelligence found out that all the top leaders of the Islamic Republic were meeting in one place at a certain time on a certain date. They passed this information on to the United States, which agreed with Israel that this was an unprecedented opportunity to decapitate the regime. So I think that was maybe the precipitating factor, Ray.
Okay, thank you. I think Betty had a question. And then after that, Larry.
I do, Ken, and three, and they really can be addressed really briefly. When you said that, when Ray asked, was the intelligence regarding, well, once we decapitate the leadership, perhaps the people will move in, and you made a comment that perhaps the intelligence got this wrong. And I'm kind of surprised because they give a lot of credit to our intelligence. Is that I really would think that perhaps the intelligence was given, but it just wasn't adhered to or listened to or heard. If you could just comment briefly on that. The second is very briefly also. Europe, I can understand totally why they don't want to get involved in this and put their boots on the ground, surely. But they put their boots on the ground for Ukraine. That's right in their backyard. And number three, interesting when Ray asked about could this happen to other straits? And I really liked that you pointed out where the other straits are vulnerably around the world. Is this a possible case for other sources of energy? And this is really, of course, it's not just oil, it's other goods and services going through these straits. But oil is such a driving factor, and we see what's happening to just the gas prices. Could this be a case for better investment in renewable energies if countries were willing? And that's my three brief questions.
Yeah, I mean, all the intelligence could do was to inform, the administration that, these leaders will be at this location. It's then up to the president of the United States to make a decision whether to join Israel, in striking them. So yeah, we have excellent intelligence. I agree with you, Betty. But of course, the final decisions to whether to act is really up to the president as the commander in chief. And then I wanted to comment about China. So China has been the main beneficiary of the U.S. Commitment to keeping the freedom of navigation alive and in keeping these straits open. President Reagan went to war against Iran in 1988. In fact, it was the U.S. decision to fight with Iran to keep the strait open that led to the end of the Iran-Iraq war. Um, so, uh, and then in terms of renewable energy, I have seen quite a few ads recently saying, why don't you, it's a good time to buy an electric vehicle because the price of gasoline is going to keep rising. So I think you're right on point there, Betty.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Betty.
There's wind and solar, but with the second one, where you said that Europe, it is totally understandable why this is not a response to Article 5, and they would be reluctant. But do you think I don't want to get into a discussion on Ukraine, but just very briefly, if you could just say yes or no, would they be willing to put their boots on the ground in Ukraine? That's right in their backyard and it's a threat to Europe.
Well, they have not put boots on the ground yet. But I did want to mention, we also should remind ourselves of the 2003 invasion of Iraq under President, George Bush. So President Bush asked France, he asked Germany to join, the coalition to invade Iraq. The British said yes. Tony Blair was the prime minister then, but both France, Canada, and Germany, all three of them refused to join because they said this is a war of choice. Mm. We don't believe that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And also, it was very important to the Europeans that the invasion of Iraq was not sanctioned by the United Nations. So the Europeans do have a history of not joining, U.S. military interventions if they don't think that the intervention is consistent with international law.
All right, thank you. Larry.
Yeah, thanks. Seems one of the stated motivations for the Trump administration to go into or to attack Iran at this time was to fully neutralize or eliminate their nuclear program, even though previously Trump had said that we had completely annihilated the program through the previous bombing. But would one of the objectives of U.S. physical intervention in Iran be to find and remove the processed nuclear materials and to fully destroy their refining capabilities? And is that reasonable or possible? Do you think we know where those things are? And it would seem that it would take, you can't just walk in and carry it out. I mean, I would suspect that you would need enormous amounts of equipment and time to dig into some of these places where it might be, buried under the destruction that the bombing had facilitated, what have you. So, I mean, is that one of the things that we would want to do? And do you think it's possible for us to send people in to do that?
Yeah, you're right, Larry, that one of the options that the Pentagon has presented to the president is to send in U.S. special forces to the Fordo site because at the bottom of the rubble, deep under the earth, is I think 90 liters of enriched plutonium. Mm-hmm. And so this is what Iran needs to develop a nuclear weapon. And that enriched plutonium is very close to being what's called weapons grade. Mm-hmm. If the United States were to seize that cache of plutonium, then they would set back Iran, decades in developing a nuclear weapon. But as you can imagine, the difficulty of that operation is very, very high because of the U.S. bombing last June. It's buried beneath rubble, very far down into the ground. How those special forces would even get to it and extract it is a really major problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can I ask another question?
Sure.
When we started bombing, President Trump said, now is your time to rise up and take back your government. Well, that's not likely to happen. I don't think there's really an organized resistance, if you would, that would be capable of of governing. I'm not sure who the leader might be of this new regime, but also it seems that uh, you have people who are dedicated to the current regime who are out there making certain that people don't rise up right now, go back into the streets. I mean, they've killed tens of thousands of people, a few months ago when they rallied to demonstrate their concern with the current regime. I mean, this isn't just a regime that's running the country, but it's also the head of their religion. And so, I mean, it's not like you could say that everybody wants to rise up and get rid of, and it's not just Iran that the supreme leader, was religious head of. I mean, there are other Shiite sympathizing or Shiites in the region that probably are pretty upset right now that we've decapitated the regime, which means, I mean, how would we think if somebody took out the Pope? I mean, I'm not sure if it's equivalent, but I think it's fairly naive to have thought that people would have the ability to rise up and take over the government with all of the repressive infrastructure that was in place. And what do we think can happen if we take enough of the leadership out? Is it really feasible to think that some other entity is going to be able to step in and rule that country?
Yeah, that's a great question, Larry. A good analogy here is Libya. If you go back to 2011, you recall that the United States joined a NATO mission to change the regime in Libya and to eliminate, Muammar Gaddafi as the dictator of Libya. The reason that there were no NATO boots on the ground in Libya. The reason that operation succeeded simply as an aerial bombing campaign is because there was an organized Libyan insurgency. There was a very well-armed militia that was in place. They were the boots on the ground. There were thousands of them. Mm-hmm. So they were able to take advantage of the bombing, which weakened the Libyan army considerably and Libyan Air Force. They were able to step in when the regime was weakened, by the bombing and take over the regime. That situation doesn't exist in Iran. There is no armed militia. There are Kurdish forces, which the CIA has been training and arming, but they only have small arms. They don't have, large weapons like tanks. And President Trump has decided not to use the Kurdish, Peshmerga fighters to try to overthrow the regime in Tehran. So that armed militia doesn't exist in Iran. So it's very difficult to see how any group, would rise up and take over the government from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Ed Rice, I think, has a comment or a question.
Yeah, regarding the decapitation concept, that was gamed over during the Cold War to determine whether we were a legitimate target for decapitation or we should reasonably do that to the Soviets. And as far as I know, the conclusion all around for many years was that decapitation didn't work. It created more problems than it solved. And I wonder if none of that research is available to the people in the Pentagon today.
It kind of reminds me, that ancient Greek myth of the Hydra. You cut off the head of the Hydra and it grows additional heads.
All right. Well, thank you, Ed. Claire Collins, you got a question?
Yes. I was having trouble with the chat. It's different from it was the last time.
Yeah, they've changed everything here. I'm having trouble myself. managing.
Okay.
Go
My
ahead.
question is the Saudi pipeline to the Red Sea above or below ground? And how vulnerable is the pipeline?
That's a good question, Claire. It is vulnerable. I'm not sure. My guess is parts of it are above and parts are below, but it is vulnerable. So if Iran wanted to target the pipeline, they could, sever it if they wanted to. That's correct, I think.
Also, do you know what year it was put in?
No, I don't. It's a good question. That's something to look into. Yeah.
Okay.
So, one of the things we've talked about is sort of their neighbors to the south. What's going on with neighbors to the north? We have Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Turkey, and even their immediate neighbors, Afghanistan and Iraq. How are they dealing with what's going on here?
Yeah, as you may know, I just spent 5 weeks in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And one of the things I noticed recently was that Russia issued a statement saying that they were very concerned about this conflict in the Persian Gulf spilling into the Caspian Sea. So Iran does border on the Caspian Sea. And the Caspian Sea is really critical for countries like Azerbaijan, which is an oil-producing country, and so many of the former Soviet republics in Central Asia, Kazakhstan's a major oil producer, for example, along the Caspian Sea. So Russia is concerned that the Central Asian republics that are still closely involved with Russia economically, that they will be adversely affected and won't be able to get their oil exported. So that's a vulnerability that Russia is drawing attention to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I see we're sort of out of questions and comments at this point. So, Ken, I want to really thank you for a really informative presentation tonight. This was kind of brought in some details and facts that most people probably aren't aware of. So we really, really do appreciate that. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Betty to kind of say goodnight and thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I looked up real quick. I figured you'd be too busy to do it. When the Saudi Arabia built its major east-west pipeline called the Petrol Line in 1981, and it's 1,200 kilometers to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. And they have another significant, the Trans-Arabian Pipeline, which was completed in 1950. It still remains a key asset with exports to the Red Sea. So you're concerned that Iran could damage significantly this pipeline through use of drones, probably. Is that a concern?
They could. They could. I was listening to the news right before I came on tonight, and every U.S. military base in the Middle East has been bombed by drones, and U.S. servicemen are living in hotels and tents.
Yeah. Ken, I think let's have a little discussion on Kharg Island just real quick before we wrap up. What I had also heard in the news is that it's going to be easy enough for the Marines, our military, to take Kharg Island, but they would become sitting ducks once there. Because it's so strategically managed by Iran. Could you comment on that? Do you think that, of course, we can never tell what the administration is going to do. We could wake up tomorrow morning and find we're in Kharg Island. I hope not. But do you also sense that there'll be a severe loss of life by taking Kharg Island? Would it be a good move?
Well, I was in the U.S. Army
myself. What's the purpose for taking it? What would be the purpose for taking Kharg Island?
Well, they said I was in the Army, National Guard for 16 years. So the way I look at this is It's always difficult when forces are placed in a location and they become static. And this is what you're suggesting, Betty. If they're static, then they become an easy target. So normally, when Army or Marine are inserted, into hostile territory, they become mobile. They move. Um, the problem is that the forces we're talking about are very small. A Marine Expeditionary Force is what, 2,500
That's right.
soldiers. The Rapid Deployment Unit of the 82nd Airborne Division is, again, 2,000. So these are small numbers compared, obviously, to the size of Iran. So they would be, wherever they're placed, they would be static because there's simply not enough of them. Also, they don't have heavy equipment. They don't have, mine-resistant personnel carriers or tanks. So their mobility is limited because by definition, they're rapid action forces. They have only small weapons.
Okay, but sobering, very sobering. And if nobody else has a comment or a discussion, now is the time to before we end this evening's program. I want to thank you for coming, and remind you that we do have one more, but actually two more programs with great decisions. We have next Tuesday on the 31st would be normally our last scheduled Great Decisions program on China. And I'm sure that we're probably discussing again. We'll be discussing Taiwan. We'll be discussing the Strait of Hormuz again with the U.S. engagement with China. And that's with Dr. Mary Gallagher out of Notre Dame. Our speaker, who was going to speak on multilateralism, but as for those of you who are on my listserv, and we probably said something to you in our blast out, the speaker, Frank O'Donnell, was in Azerbaijan and actually attending a conference in Baku discussing, he was with the United Nations for a long time in critical leadership positions. And this was a meeting of various European counterparts to talk about this very initiative that's going on right now. And he got delayed. He could not get out safely because of his position just north bordering Iran, and because Azerbaijan has friendly relations with the United Nations or with the United States, was getting hit by drones. And so it took him a while to get out. But we scheduled that for April the 14th. And that is on multilateralism, and is there a shift in the New World Order as we see it now? And is it just going to be a temporary shift, or might it be permanent? Can we restore what we have known now for many years with our alliances? And then in the first Monday in May, we are going to have our final program of the year with the Global Speaker Series. And this will be on renewable energies. And no doubt you want to join us for that, because one of the reasons for asking the question I did is that will be discussed. Does this war with oil being such an underpinning to it, does it bring forward the case of making a stronger investment in renewable energies, wind and solar, that were not oil dependent? And that would be it. That would be our we do have, if you'd like to join us, for those of you who are in Indianapolis, we'd like to remind you that on April the 6th, on a Monday evening, we are going to be having the ambassador from Moldova to the United States. Yes. Will be here in Indianapolis, and we are hosting him for a number of meetings and things. I believe we're also partnering with the International Center on that. And we have a special evening planned for you if you would like to please join us. It's going to be Monday evening on the 6th, and there'll be more details of that. I believe that is going to be held in a library, public library in Fishers. Is that correct? But the details of that will be on our website. And then if you come, there'll be probably several of us who may be going out for an informal dinner afterward, and that might be kind of fun if you'd like to join us for that. I know people do. We don't have very many in-person events, so when we do have them, we love seeing you, and it gives us an opportunity to all be together. But that is our schedule, and we are grateful you joined us. We were very pleased to bring this program to you this evening. And thank you.